So I'd actually planned on doing this a little bit differently. I was going to film myself driving down the mountain into El Centro, get these nice shots of the desert in early spring. But early spring weather in Southern California, especially out towards the desert and the East County of San Diego, well, it gets fairly warm pretty quickly, and it's mid-90s out here today, which, you know, for the desert, it's not super hot. In summer, you easily hit triple digits, but hot enough that mounting my phone in my window made it overheat and caused my camera to stop recording halfway through. Actually, no, not even halfway through. I was about 2 minutes from being done with this video already. So I guess the fourth time is the charm, friends and gamers of all stripes. And speaking of, greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. My name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and welcome back to your regularly scheduled programming. And welcome back to the first episode of Dungeons and Discussions that I have had in a very, very long time. It has been months since I've recorded a Dungeons and Discussions video. And so, a quick touch on what Dungeons and Discussions as a series is for those of you who aren't aware of it. In short, Dungeons and Discussions is just a simple free-form discussion series where I discuss a topic that relates loosely, at least in some way, to my past with D&D. Generally speaking, it's going to involve stories about games that I played in the past of Dungeons and Dragons, or recounting current games, fun events in D&D, things like that, and sometimes even a little more unusual topics. The oddest one I have in this series is actually a topic I had where I was discussing sexual dimorphism amongst druid wild shape forms in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, because a friend of mine from the Midwest asked me a very odd question relating about that. However, today's topic is not so whimsical and silly as that. It's a little bit more serious, and as you can see from the title, we're going to be discussing free expression today, and specifically how that relates to the single most important lesson that Dungeons & Dragons ever taught me. And really, this is a lesson that tabletop gaming as a whole, specifically tabletop role-playing as a whole, taught me, but D&D was the one that I played almost exclusively when I was younger, and it was through playing D&D that I learned this, so Dungeons and Discussions. Excuse me. I need to readjust. I can't actually mount this thing in the window. Like I said, it's too hot. The phone will overheat and the recording will stop. So, why am I discussing free expression as it relates to this lesson? And more importantly, what is the lesson? Well, let's start with the latter half of that, because it's the more important part. The single most important lesson Dungeons & Dragons ever taught me, the single most important lesson Dungeons & Dragons ever taught me is that when you're dealing with other people, when you're trying to plan something around the actions of other people, no matter what it is, and that's why it relates to D&D, and I'll get into that a little bit in a second, but no matter what it is, things are not going to go the way you expect them to go. Other people are going to influence the outcome. The other people you're involving are going to drastically influence that outcome. So the fantasy you have about whatever result you get, 95% of the time, you will not get that result. Now, in Dungeons & Dragons and tabletop gaming as a whole, we should all pretty much be aware of how this relates. It's player choice, GM choice. It's the choice of the individuals at the table altering the expected results, the expected path you were going to take. Generally speaking, that involves the GM having to understand that the players are going to surprise them. Make another adjustment here real quick. The players are going to surprise you. They're going to do things you don't expect. It's bound to happen. It's a rule of thumb amongst tabletop gaming. By contrast to the Dungeon Master can oftentimes do things the players won't expect. But generally speaking, it's more the players catching a DM off guard. in a tabletop gaming setting, most players, most DMs and GMs know to expect that things they won't expect are going to happen. They know things are going to get weird. They know people at the table are going to surprise them. Now, how does this relate to free expression, and why am I discussing this now? Well, it relates to free expression because of a few certain actors in the public and political world today who have been pushing for censorship, for the tamp down of free expression, and, for rules regarding what people can or cannot say and do. Now, this has happened with multiple ideological groups throughout history. Currently, it's the identitarian, authoritarian far left who is largely pushing for this in the first world. 10 to 20 years ago, it was the authoritarian far right who was pushing for that. Your more extreme Evangelo Collins and things like that, pushing for things like, anti-gay rights, things like that. Now, and censorship as well. I think back to even though supposedly she was on the left, I think back to Tipper Gore and her attempts to censor music in the 90s and early 2000s. So, excuse me. Take a quick drink of water here real quick. So, why do I bring this up now of all times? Well, because there have been a multitude of stories over this past week that have shown this lesson to be true. I'm going to link quite a few in the description down below. Mostly, a few of them are going to be articles, and probably actually about half of them articles, half of them videos of people discussing other instances where this has happened that weren't put into articles. Most of those videos are going to come from Tim Pool's secondary channel. And I'm selecting his videos specifically because even though they came on his opinion channel, he does a fantastic job of breaking down just why the thinking behind these rules and regulations that these people want to push is so off. So, what's been going on? Well, basically, the identitarian, authoritarian left has pushed over these last few years for a lot of censorship. Largely, that censorship has been on social media and in colleges, because really those were the only places they were able to influence with that kind of thing. But make no mistake, that's a big field of influence. It's a big problem to have. So, they push for rules and regulations regarding hate speech, regarding offensive speech, so on and so forth. The typical kind of stuff. If you were alive through the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, if you remember the Bush era, the 90s, the 80s, the Satanic Panic, all that kind of stuff, you'll know what I'm talking about. But you'll remember it having come from the super conservative far right. Nowadays, the table has been flipped. It's coming from the opposite end of the spectrum, but by and large, it's the same kind of thing. It's very moralistic, very authoritarian. It's all about control, control, control. Well, a lot of these people have been getting their wish in terms of these things being implemented. The problem they're facing now is that they're being implemented in such a way that it has immediately and pretty viciously bit them in the ass. All of the stories I'm linking down below have to deal with this, have to deal with people who have pushed for this sort of censorship, pushed for this sort of control over people's language, people's expression, biting them in the ass. And it ties in with that lesson because this is not a result they expected. And it shows in how they react to it. They weren't looking at these rules, or when they were pushing for these rules, they weren't looking at what they were doing and thinking, oh, this could turn around and be used against me. No. They had a fantasy in their minds. A fantasy wherein they would implement these rules and then the evil right-wing bigots of the world, to them, right-wing bigots being literally anyone who is to the right of them. Hell, I mean, the common joke I hear is anyone to the right of Karl Marx. But fucking hell, with as far left as a lot of these people have gone, I would even say that Karl Marx would probably consider too far right for their tastes. But I digress. The point is, they had an image in their heads that these rules would be implemented and that, some far right hateful bigot would get censored and jailed and fined, and they'd be able to applaud and cheer and say, haha, I have done good for the world. I have managed to stop this evil racist, sexist, whateverist, homophobe, trans, whatever. This evil person who I have othered, this evil other, from saying what they wanted to say and hurting someone's feelings. What did we say at the beginning of the video? That's right. Throw away the fantasy. 95% of the time, the fantasy is not going to tie into the reality. And the reality is, the people who pushed for this are now the first ones to be bitten by it. They dug a snake pit. And they didn't think that they would be the first ones to be pushed in. They didn't think they were going to be pushed in at all. They thought they were going to push everyone else in there and say, see, I am sacrificing you for the good of the world. It's not how it works. It's never how it works. And if they understood their history, if they cared to learn about history, they would know this. Censorship has never worked, and it has never been benevolent. It will never be benevolent. It doesn't help anybody except the people in power. And there seems to be this underlying fantasy that if you push for censorship, you're not going to be touched by it because somehow you think you're going to be one of those ones in power. But you're not. 99.9999% of the time, you're not. Because you don't have the power to begin with. They listen to you because it's convenient. They can look at you pushing for these things and say, oh, I mean, the public wants it, clearly. Look how loud these people are being for it. So, let's just implement this rule, that rule, tamp down on this person, that person, that person, this person. For long, in this case, almost immediately, the gun they've created has been turned against them. Now, there are 3 stories in particular that I want to talk about regarding this. I'm going to talk about them in brief. The first one involved a woman in Palo Alto. And it's very likely you might have heard about this because the story went kind of viral. But if you didn't, the long and short of it is there was a woman in Palo Alto who went to a Starbucks, saw a 74-year-old man there wearing a MAGA hat. And she proceeded to harass the hell out of this guy, screaming at him, calling him a bigot, calling him racist, calling him a Nazi, which is especially ironic because he's Jewish. I'm thinking it's ironic, too, that if anyone who leans on that side of the spectrum sees this, they're probably going to call me a Nazi, even though my dad is Jewish. Yeah, kind of funny how that supposedly somehow works. But nevertheless, she's insulting him, berating him, screaming at him, tries to get the other patrons of the Starbucks to join her. He tells her, if you don't stop, I'm going to call the cops. And she leaves. She gets her food, gets her drink, and leaves. Comes back about half an hour or so later, finds he's still there, freaks out him again, tells him, I want you to call the cops so that I can find out, your name, your wife's name, your kids' names, where you all live. She somehow seems to think that if he files a police report against her, she, as the person with the report being filed against her, gets to access all his personal information, which is weird. It doesn't work like that. But it's expecting someone like this to have sense. And the reason why I say it's stupid to expect someone like this to have sense is not only because what she's doing is fucking dumb, but she bragged about it on Facebook. A 4 or 5 paragraph post going on and on about this, and that's how we know it happened. And so she was expecting that she would get people to rally behind her, like she had hoped to get the patrons of the Starbucks to rally behind her. That she would get people going, yeah, this guy's terrible, let's find him, we'll shame him into oblivion, we'll ruin his life because how dare he support Donald Trump? How dare he wear that MAGA hat? What happened? She got fired. Yeah. Bunch of people looked into her and were like, you're a fucking terrible person. Found out where she worked. Found out that she did this. Apparently, I think, from what I recall, she did this like on her lunch break. So she was technically still representing the company. Contacts the owner. The owner finds out about it. And then he reaches out and says, hey, you know, she doesn't represent, like, what she did goes entirely against my personal values, my personal beliefs. I don't want someone this cruel working for me. And so he fired her. She expected to be hailed as a hero. Instead, she ruined her own life and lost her job. The second story is, it's going to be a lot shorter for me to explain, because generally speaking, there's not as many details for this one. But this took place in Arizona, I believe in the Phoenix area. I'll have the article linked down below, so if I'm incorrect about that, please forgive me. Where the specifics of where it took place really aren't important. But there was a college in Arizona that was hosting an event by the Customs and Border Protection Agency, CBP. Well, two young women, far left, decided they were going to protest the event. They went, they protested the event, and what happened? They were both charged with a misdemeanor for protesting the event on college grounds. Now, one of the details that's unclear is whether or not this was a public or private event. If it was a private event, the misdemeanor could have been for trespassing, like if they broke into the event. So that possibility is there. But if it was a public event, well, then it means that they just ran afoul of the, anti-free speech laws or anti-free speech rules that these people keep trying to push in our colleges. Again, the exact kind of people who would push for these rules, they just got bit in the ass by the exact rules they push for. Charged with a misdemeanor for protesting an event that they didn't like. And oftentimes it's because they don't realize that the First Amendment does not just cover free speech. It covers freedom of assembly, protest, freedom of the press, freedom of distribution, things like that. There's 5 or 6 major freedoms covered by the First Amendment. They think it just covers speech. No. It's a lot more than that. And it's their ignorance that keeps getting them bit in the ass by these stupid, stupid rules they keep putting into place. So the final story. This one I don't believe had an article. This is going to be one of the ones linked down below that's in a video. But I learned about this just yesterday. And I had hoped to get this video out yesterday because having heard about it yesterday, I was like, oh, wow. This is... or maybe it was Saturday. No, it was Saturday. So it's a couple days old at this point. There was a writer with the, not the ACLE, SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, who got his account suspended on Twitter for hate speech. Now, this guy is one of those types, and self-avowedly, one of those types who will call anyone to the right of Marx, basically, a right-wing, hateful bigot. He, in his little tirade, after he did get his account restored, he put up a little tirade talking about how it's bullshit that he got banned when far-right Nazis or whatever, I don't think that was the exact terminology he used, but basically, far-right racist homophobes, that kind of shit, like Stefan Molyneux, who is an anarcho-capitalist libertarian, which is not far-right, and Lauren Southern, who is a pretty milquetoast, basic conservative, again, not far-right, have not had their accounts banned. Now, there is a directional leaning on Twitter that a lot of people have noticed, whether they are, have their ear to the ground with these kind of things like I personally do, or they're just, your standard everyday person who just happens to kind of use Twitter a bit. A lot of people are becoming more and more aware that there is this leftward lean in terms of how things are treated, this left-facing favorable lean. Where more often than not, things that would be culturally considered right-wing, especially in the United States, tend to get tamped down on harder than things on the left. So why did this guy get banned for hate speech? Well, because he was talking about the Christchurch shooting and how it related, how he supposedly found these links that related it to an organization in the U.S. Now, we know anyone who has done a bit of research into what the Christchurch shooter wanted knows by his own admission that he set this up specifically to cause division in the U.S. He doesn't have any ties with people here. He just wanted to make it look like he did. And a lot of people just bit right into that. And, you know, they swallowed the bait, hook, line, and sinker. So, this guy's going into that, and he's showing, basically, with imagery, how it related to an ethnocentric group, a white supremacist group specifically, that I believe is either based out of Eastern Europe or its members are largely Eastern European, and I don't recall which nation. It's not really important. Point is, when he was doing this, he was showing imagery linking that he thought linked these events because they shared a known hate symbol between them. And he shared 3 or 4 images with this hate symbol on them. Well, Twitter bots, or maybe it was the actual people, but I'm assuming it's the bots, noticed this symbol. They're not going to take, if it was algorithmic, it's not going to take the context into account. And that's why I think it was algorithmic. Because the context was he was trying to show, like, yeah, there's a link to this, you know, these people, these other people are hateful bigots, you know, blah, 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 this and that. He was trying to fight against that kind of thing in his in my opinion, rather flawed way of doing so. Well, now the algorithm's not going to recognize that. They're just going to it's just going to recognize the symbol. And so, because he shared the symbols on like 4 different images, he got banned. And as Tim Pool mentioned in his own video, the difference between him and Stefan Molyneux and Lauren Southern, the reason why Stefan Molyneux and Lauren Southern have not gotten banned for this is because they didn't share the hate symbols, and that's what these people don't realize. When they're fighting against what they're trying to fight against, while calling for censorship of it, when they use the symbolism that their perceived enemies use, the censors aren't going to recognize that they're pushing against it. They don't look at the context. They just see the symbol. Again, the expectation is they're fighting the good fight. They will stop these hateful bigots from doing what they do by silencing them. Instead, since they're sharing those symbols themselves, and the machine learning algorithms that are put into place are not going to take the context of what they say into account, banned. And that's the lesson. The single most important lesson Dungeons & Dragons ever taught me, a lesson that has remained relevant through my entire life. When you're dealing with other people, when you're trying to plan something that will affect other people, be it in the context of a tabletop campaign, something as small and personal and localized as that, to something grander, like legislation meant to censor people. The result you are expecting, the fantasy that you think is going to happen, the hope that you have, 90% of the time, what you think you're pushing for, what you think you're planning, what you think you're going to get and you want, you're not going to get. And that's about all I've got for you today, friends and gamers. I know this is a little bit more philosophical than the stuff I usually do, and I, generally speaking on this channel, don't like to touch on this kind of thing, but, you know, freedom of expression is a very, very important thing to protect. And as much risk as it brings to me to discuss this kind of thing, I don't care. I'm going to do my part to protect it because I value it highly. Without it, I can't even do the fun part of this hobby here without the risk of potentially being silenced if I happen to say something someone else doesn't like. So that's all I've got for you today, friends and gamers. But let's go ahead and we'll end this with a little bit more fun of a question. What are some areas in your own life, be it across tabletop gaming or more serious aspects of it like freedom of expression, what are some areas in which you have seen this rule come into play? How has it remained relevant for your life? Because I imagine it's been relevant for all of us. Go ahead and let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. If you liked the video, feel free to leave it a like. Subscribe if you would like to see more. Hit that bell notification icon. Open up the description so you can check out these stories for yourself. Please feel free to go ahead, kind of confirm them a little bit more for yourself. This is more of a freeform thing I'm doing here. As you can see, I'm just filming. I'm holding my phone in my hand, filming it in my car. I don't have the sources right in front of me. So it's highly likely that I got some information mixed up. Go ahead, read for yourself, confirm for yourself. Links will be in the description down below. You can also follow me on my social media pages down there as well. And starting this next weekend, we're going to be getting back into the normal swing of things. I'm going to do my absolute best to get my next bestiaria video up on the Tyranids. If I can't do that, then I'll get the 5 good player habits that can go bad video up in its place because it's a lot simpler to make. But either way, we're back to it. Starting this week, we are getting back to the normal schedule. It's probably going to actually be just a once per week thing. I'd like to do more, but honestly, with the summer season coming in at work, that being our busiest time of the year, I don't really think it's likely I'll be able to, but I'm going to do my best. So, dear friends and gamers of all stripes, with that, I bid you adieu. As usual, my name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and it is my sincere hope that you continue to roll high, role play well, and game on.